Chapter 18. Alexander Saslavsky. What the teacher can and cannot do. Alexander Saslavsky is probably best known as a solo artist, as the concertmaster of a great symphonic orchestra, as the leader of the admirable quartet which bears his name. Yet, at the same time, few violinists can speak with more authority anent the instructive phases of their art. Not only has he been active for years in the teaching field, but as a pedagogue he rounds out the traditions of Ferdinand David, Massar, Auer, and Grun, Vienna Hochschule, acquired during his study years, with the result of his own long and varied experience. Beginning at the beginning, I asked Mr. Saslavsky to tell me something about methods, his own in particular. Method is a flexible term, he answered. What the word should mean is the cultivation of the pupil's individuality along the lines best suited to it. Not that a guide which may be employed to develop common sense principles is not valuable. But even here, the same guide, violin method, will not answer for every pupil. Personally, I find de Bailly's violin school the most generally useful, and for advanced students, Ferdinand David's second book. Then, for scales, I insist on my pupils being able to play a perfect scale through 3 octaves, the Harimeli Book of Scales. Many advanced violinists cannot play a good scale simply because of a lack of fundamental work. As soon as the pupil is able, he should take up Kreutzer and stick to him as the devotee does to his Bible. Anyone who can play the 42 exercises as they should be played may be called a well-balanced violinist. There are too many purely mechanical exercises, and the circumstance that we have Kreutzer, Rode, Fiorillo, Ravelli and don't emphasizes the fact. And there are too many elaborate and complicated violin methods. Ševčík, for instance, has devised a purely mechanical system of this kind, perfect from a purely mechanical standpoint, but one whose consistent use, in my opinion, kills initiative and individuality. I have had experience with Ševčík pupils in quartet playing, and have found that they have no expression. What the teacher can and cannot do. After all, the teacher can only supply the pupil with the violinistic equipment. The pupil must use it. There is tone, for instance. The teacher cannot make tone for the pupil, he can only show him how tone can be made. Sometimes a purely physiological reason makes it almost impossible for the pupil to produce a good natural tone. If the fingertips are not adequately equipped with cushions, and a pupil wishes to use the vibrato, there is nothing with which he can vibrate. There is real meaning, speaking of the violinist's tone, in the phrase he has it at his fingers' tips. Then there is the matter of slow practice. It rests with the pupil to carry out the teacher's injunctions in this respect. The average pupil practices too fast, is too eager to develop his art as a money maker. And too many really gifted students take up orchestra playing, which no one can do continuously and hope to be a solo player. 4 hours of study work may be nullified by a single hour of orchestra playing. Musically it is broadening, of course, but I am speaking from the standpoint of the student who hopes to become a solo artist. An opera orchestra is especially bad in this way. In the symphonic ensemble more care is used, but in the opera orchestra they employ the right arm for tremolo. There is a good deal of camouflage as regards string playing in an opera orchestra, and much of the music, notably Wagner's, is quite impracticable. And lessons are often made all too short. A teacher in common honesty cannot really give a pupil much in half an hour, it is not a real lesson. There is a good deal to be said for class teaching as it is practiced at the European conservatories, especially as regards interpretation. In my student days I learned much from listening to others play the concertos they had prepared, and from noting the teacher's corrections. And this even in a purely technical way. I can recall Kubelik playing Paganini as a wonderful display of the technical points of violin playing. A great defect. Most pupils seem to lack an absolute sense of rhythm, a great defect. yet where latent it may be developed. Here Kreutzer is invaluable, since he presents every form of rhythmic problem, scales in various rhythms and bowings. Kreutzer's exercise No. 2, for example, may be studied with any number of bowings. To produce a broad tone the bow must move slowly, and in rapid passages should never seem to introduce technical exercises in a concert number. The student should memorize Kreutzer and Fiorillo. Fleches study and offer the artist or professional musician who has time for little practice excellent material, but are not meant for the pupil, unless he be so far advanced that he may be trusted to use them alone. Tone, practice time. Broad playing gives the singing tone, the true violin tone, a long bow drawn its full length. Like every general rule though, this one must be modified by the judgment of the individual player. Violin playing is an art of many mysteries. Some pupils grasp a point at once, others have to have it explained 7 or 8 different ways before grasping it. The serious student should practice not less than 4 hours, preferably in 20-minute intervals. After some 20 minutes the brain is apt to tire. And since the fingers are controlled by the brain, it is best to relax for a short time before going on. Mental and physical control must always go hand in hand. 4 hours of intelligent, consistent practice work are far better than 8 or 10 of fatigue effort. A national conservatory. Some 5 years ago too many teachers gave their pupils the Mendelssohn and Paganini concertos to play before they knew their Kreutzer. But there has been a change for the better during recent years. Kneissl was one of the first to produce pupils here who played legitimately, according to standard violinistic ideals. One reason why our has had such brilliant pupils is that poor students were received at the Petrograd Conservatory free of charge. All they had to supply was talent, and I look forward to the time when we will have a national conservatory in this country, supported by the government. Then the poor, but musically gifted, pupil will have the same opportunities that his brother, who is well-to-do, now has. Some personal views and reflections. You ask me to tell you something of my own musical preferences. Well, take the concertos. I have reached a point where the Mendelssohn, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach and Brahms concertos seem to sum up what is truly worthwhile. The others begin to bore me, even Bruch. Paganini, Wieniawski, etc., are mainly mediums of display. Most of the great violinists, Issei, Thibaut, etc., during recent years are reverting to the violin sonatas. Issei, for instance, has recently been playing the Lazari Sonata, a very powerful and beautiful work. My experiences as a concertmaster. I have played with Weingartner, Sansons, whose amiability to me, when he first visited this country, I recall with pleasure, Gustav Mahler, Tchaikovsky, Safonov, Seidel, Bauer, and Walter Damrosch, whose friend and associate I have been for the last 22 years. He is a wonderful man, many-sided and versatile, a notably fine pianist, and playing chamber music with him during successive summers is numbered among my pleasantest recollections. In speaking of concertos some time ago, I forgot to mention one work well worth studying. This is the Russian Wieniawski's Concerto in D, which I played with the Russian Symphony Orchestra some 8 years ago for the first time in this country, as well as a fine romance and caprice by Rubinstein. Is the music a concertmaster is called upon to play always violinistic? Far from it. Symphonic music, inasmuch as the concertmaster is concerned, is usually not idiomatic violin music. Richard Strauss's violin concerto can really be played by the violinist. The obligatos in his symphonies are a very different matter, they go beyond accepted technical boundaries. With Stravinsky it is the same. The violin obbligato in Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, though, is real violin music. Debussy and Ravel are most subtle, they call for a particularly good ear, since the harmonic balance of their music is very delicate. The concertmaster has to develop his own interpretations, Subject, of course, to the conductor's ideas. Violin Mastery. Violin Mastery. It means to me complete control of the fingerboard, a being at home in every position, absolute sureness of fingering, absolute equality of tone under all circumstances. I remember Issei playing Tchaikovsky's Serenade Melancholique, and using a fingering for certain passages which I liked very much. I asked him to give it to me in detail, but he merely laughed and said, "I'd like to, but I cannot, because I really do not remember which fingers I used." That is mastery, a control so complete that fingering was unconscious, and the interpretation of the thought was all that was in the artist's mind. Sevcik's complete technical mastery is after all not perfect, since it represents mechanical and not mental control.